In Bronze Age Mesopotamia, Abraham, a pastoralist, out of nowhere, heard a divine message. This message told him, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Although Abraham already believed in God intellectually, out of looking at the skies, for example, this connection now became personal, above reason. God told him to leave everything in you and go on an adventure into an unknown reality. According to Jewish tradition, this marks the start of Judaism and Israelite prophecy. Later in the story, God promises Abraham that through him, humanity will be blessed. This promise was proved to be true by history, with perhaps no idea influencing humanity more positively than Judaism and the Israelite prophets, whether it's laying the foundation of Western humanistic moral code, inspiring many of the greatest artistic works in history, and giving many people happier and more meaningful lives. Even today, the state of Israel is a center of light in the Middle East, being a democracy bravely fighting and defending itself against jihadist totalitarian regimes and cults. In this video, we are going to explore the question, what actually went inside the heads of the famous biblical prophets, and how did they manage to achieve what they did? In order to understand who the biblical prophets were, we first need to understand what they weren't. In many cultures and religious traditions, being holy and sacred means isolating yourself from material and worldly reality and purely focusing on spiritual matters. This is seen, for example, in Buddhist and many Christian monks not being allowed to have sex and make children. The biblical prophets had a different approach. Although the biblical prophets did certainly receive divine, mystical, and ecstatic revelations, something which happened through dreams like Joseph and Zechariah, music like the prophetic schools the prophet Samuel established, or in most cases out of nowhere without the prophets asking or preparing for it. The biblical prophets used their divine insights to solve real-world problems, whether it's leadership like Moses and Joshua, military strategy like Gideon, or saving the economy like Joseph, as well as envisioning a better and more just world like Isaiah. In fact, biblical prophets such as Isaiah, Amos, and Jeremiah actually protested against Israelite religious culture at the time, which focused purely on worship while abandoning moral responsibility and action. According to Judaism, the greatest biblical prophet was Moses. Why was Moses the greatest prophet? According to traditional Jewish commentary, there are two main reasons for that. The first is that the prophecy of Moses is described as the only prophecy that could bring God's message through shining lens, unlike other biblical prophets who brought God's message from a non-shining lens. This is believed to come from Moses' humility, which prevented personal bias from interfering. Another thing that distinguishes Moses from other prophets is that, while other prophets only had macro visions of making the world a better place, Moses' prophecy touched all areas of life. This is seen in the incredible moral, social, and political revolution the Torah created, which includes everything from limiting the power of the king in order to prevent tyranny to protecting women through prohibition on rape and prostitutions. Unlike the common atheist myth that the Bible supports slavery, Judaism unprecedentedly virtually eliminated slavery as it was known in the ancient Near East, reducing it to virtually only two situations when someone sold himself into slavery, and even this is only allowed for 6 years under good conditions. It also created a judicial code in which people are judged based on their personal actions and not based on their social status, and more. Moses' prophecy also touched art and architecture, something that manifested in the tabernacle, which eventually became the temple in Jerusalem, which took incredibly complex spiritual and metaphysical ideas and manifested them in a building and rituals that gave an incredible experience. Moses' prophecy also includes everything from not allowing to harm the environment to dietary laws which reduce the consumption of meat, something which is seen by common Jewish interpretation as preparing humanity for vegetarianism, to prayer rituals, to holidays, to family life, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. There is virtually not a single area of life Moses didn't reach. Not everyone who has incredible spiritual, divine, and mystical experiences is a prophet. The Mishnah, which is a series of Jewish books on how to practically practice the Torah, famously says that prophecy doesn't rest on any but the wise, hero, and rich. For example, Bilam, who was a Moabite mystic mentioned in the books of Numbers, is believed to have had the prophetic talent of Moses and Abraham. However, he was wicked, so that's why he didn't reach their influence. Another limitation is that there are periods of history in which prophecy, as it exists in the Bible, is limited or just doesn't exist. For example, the Talmud famously says that from the day that the temple was destroyed, prophecy was taken from the prophets and given to fools and to children. For example, some Talmudic sages, such as Hillel the Elder, are said to have had the talent of prophecy, but didn't live in an historical period and culture that allowed that. After the end of biblical prophecy, the scripture Judaism moved from the prophets who had direct experience to rabbinical sages who focused on intellectual discussion and the formation of Jewish laws and ideas. The lifestyle, institutions, and books that the Jewish sages created are actually what evaporated idolatry from the Jewish people and allowed Judaism to continue through thousands of years of diaspora. Hope isn't over for prophecy though. For example, the biblical prophet Joel prophesied that in the future prophecy will return in a much greater fashion than previously experienced. Quote, "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions." 20th century Jewish mystics and rabbi Harav Anazir argued that the future return of prophecy may be different than biblical period prophecy, perhaps involving the use of technology, science, and modern logic and philosophy.